Okay, now I'd like to talk a bit, just for a little while, about multiple murder. We've already defined the terms murder, not negligent homicide, uh, negligent homicide. Those terms are out of the way, so let me throw some more terms at you. Um, Not so much going to use a lot of these terms, but the terms themselves kind of give you some clue, some thinking about serial killers and multiple murder. The first term that I want to define for you is a modus operandi. The old MO, you've heard the term a million times on TV, detective shows, cop shows, what have you. It means what it does on the same thing in real life as it does in TV. The modus operandi, the MO, are the actions and procedures that an offender engages in to commit a crime successfully. It's a behavioral pattern that the offender learns as he gains experience in committing an offense. One of the things that we use to determine, to decide or identify the fact that we're looking for a serial killer is if we look for patterns, look for a modus operandi, so to speak. Next one is a signature. Next term, signature or personage signature. This is anything that goes beyond what is necessary to commit the crime. Signature, things like ritualistic behavior, an unusual pattern, or a pattern of items being removed from the crime scene. For instance, if a murderer always removes an item of the victim's clothing, that would be a signature. The next term I want to define for you is staging. Staging is an intentional alteration of a crime scene. Prior to the arrival of the police, it's done either to redirect the police away from the offender or to protect the victim or the victim's family. Some offenders, some multiple murderers, some serial killers, when they're done, experience feelings of shame and remorse or regret, and so they try to mask those feelings. They deal with those emotions through staging. And of course, then again, there are those who engage in staging just to throw the police off the trail. And then finally, the last kind of term along these lines is undoing. Undoing is a behavioral pattern in which the offender tries to psychologically undo the murder. They may wash the victim. If it's been a sexual, if the murder involved a sexual assault, they may reclothe the victim. They may place the body on a bed, make it look like they're sleeping. Something that's psychologically just undo in their mind what they've done. Again, much like with staging, some offenders, once the act is done, feel some remorse, feel some regret, feelings of shame, and they try to psychologically deal with these through this process of undoing. Now, there's another version of undoing, just like there's another version of staging. The other version of undoing is when the offender attempts to dehumanize the victim through mutilation or obscuring the victim's identity, make the victim less of a person in their mind. Okay, we're talking about multiple murder. There are actually 3 types of multiple murder, and your textbook talks about them all, and I'm just going to focus on one of those. The 2 that I'm not going to focus on are spree murder, which normally refers to the killing of 3 or more victims without any cooling off period, usually at 2 or more locations. So this is a good example is the spree murder that occurred at the University of Texas campus several decades ago. The young man who climbed the watchtower Prior to that act, he at home had killed his mother. His wife killed his family, killed a family member there, then transferred to the UT campus, climbed the watchtower, and committed, set about killing folks there. Now that is, there's no cooling off period. He went from killing at his house straight to the University of Texas campus, and then the killing there. So there's no cooling off period, but there's at least two locations: his home and the UT campus. The Virginia Tech murders, another example where there's several killings without any cooling off period between it. There were two victims in one place, and then the killer moved to another place, another location, the Virginia Tech campus, and killed some more folks. That would be another example of a spree murder. The next type of multiple murder is the mass murder. This is the killing of 3 or more individuals at a single location with no cooling off period. This can be a family mass murder, or just a classic mass murder. The one that sticks out most in my mind was the Luby's massacre in Killeen back in, I want to say this was 92, give or take. Should be about around 92, because it was before I went to Alaska. I was stationed at Fort Hood when that particular mass murder happened. In fact, me and my unit, the unit that I was with, we were on our way back from an exercise in California. Pulled into, ironically, the parking lot of a Luby's when we found out what had happened in Killeen. Many of us not so jokingly wondered if we could take our M16s with us into the restaurant. I don't think any of us were really serious, because none of us did, but temptation was surely there. In fact, one of the people that was killed in that massacre was our airfield commander out at West Fort Hood, where I did most of my work during my time there at Fort Hood. But again, this is an example of somebody killing several people in one location with no cooling off period. But hopefully you can see the difference between the Luby's massacre, and like I said, I think it was 92. Difference between that and the Virginia Tech shooting just a couple of years ago. Okay, finally the last type of multiple murder, and the one that everyone's really interested in. Every semester I have students that want to write a paper about serial killers. And so serial murder is the last one. Involves a single individual who kills a number of persons over time with a bracket of time, with a period of time between killings. And we call that a cooling off period. And that cooling off period may be days or weeks, but more likely cooling off period is months or years between murders. Sometimes we see with some killers, like a Ted Bundy, who will go at the beginning of his career, goes years, months between murders, so we think. And then as his career as a serial killer progresses, that cooling off period steadily shrinks. Now, what do we know about multiple murder, serial murder? We know that it is very rare. When I was growing up in the 1980s, I lived in Tallahassee, Florida during Bundy's trial. At the time Bundy was executed, around the same time there was an active serial killer in Gainesville, just south of Tallahassee. Within the same period of time, there was Ilich Ramirez out in California, and these people and people like him, Theodore Kaczynski, the Unabomber, they were on the nightly news on a regular basis. If you grew up in the 80s, and you probably remember seeing these folks talked about on TV all the time, and it made it feel like these serial killers were everywhere. And the reality is, they're serial killers are the rarest of the rare offenders, which makes them very difficult to study, because there really are very, very few true serial killers. We do know that they're increasing in frequency. they're more it's more common now than it has been in the past. Why we don't really know because they're so rare, because it's so hard to study them. We're not sure why the increase. Regardless, serial killers are responsible for about 1 to 2% of homicides in the U.S. each year. These perceived increases in serial killers, and mind you, what I just said about increase in serial killers may not be entirely true, because one of the things that may be happening is that there may not be more serial killers than there used to be, but because police departments and law enforcement nationwide communicate better with increases in computer technology and methods that allow the police to look at modus operandi and killings, and looking at signatures and murders and unsolved murders, we've got a better chance of connecting murders. So there may not be more serial killers than ever before. It may just be we're identifying them better than we used to. Okay, let's see. Just some let me give you some traits of these people, serial killers. Average age for a serial killer is about 28.5. And unlike, and serial murder is one of these really unusual offenses, because serial killers tend to start their offending behavior late in life. Now remember, an average offending age for a normal criminal is they peak, most criminals start in their teens, they peak somewhere between 18 and 25. After age 25, offending drops off. Even with life course persistent offenders that we've talked about a few weeks ago, those folks, even though they're continuing their criminal behavior patterns throughout their life, they're still starting very early. In fact, the life course persistent guys start much earlier than most offenders. Serial killers are even more rare than the life course persistent offender because they start very late in life. In fact, most serial killers don't start their killing behavior until somewhere between age 24 and as late as 40. I can't think of another crime type except for maybe white-collar crime where offenders begin that late in life. And for white-collar crime, and we'll study white-collar crime here before too long, for white-collar crime, it's just a matter of to get access to the really good, profitable white-collar crime, you actually have to be in business for a while. Think Jeff Skilling. He had to work his way up. First, the average age at first arrest for serial killers is 36. Now, think about that for a minute. They usually start between age 24 and 40, but the average age for their first arrest is 36. Which means, on average, serial killers are active for around 4 years before they're ever caught. So, talking a little bit of time before we catch these folks. Let's see, other traits of serial killers, about 85% of them are white males. Not all of them. There are African American serial killers. There are female serial killers, which we'll talk about later. But on average, 85% of serial killers are white men. Sorry. 50% of them are local to their killing area. There's not very many that go outside of where they live. About half of them, only half of them go outside of where they live to do their killing and then come back home. There's a stereotype that serial killers are these educated, highly intelligent individuals. We usually tend to think of serial killers having all the same traits as psychopaths, and that's not entirely accurate. Serial killers have a very wide variety of educational and occupational backgrounds. Majority of them are not highly educated. and tend to work in unskilled labor. They often have very extensive criminal behavior, criminal records. Tends to involve petty theft, embezzlement, forgery, mostly nonviolent stuff. About 75% of them have juvenile records, and their killing methods vary greatly. In fact, more than half, about 61% of serial killers commit their murders with a wide variety of methods. Individual killers don't stick to a single method. You don't get the Dexter. Dexter, how he commits his little thing the same way every time. That's not common. Most of them vary. They have different ways of doing their killing. Excuse me. All right. Let's see what else we got here. Uploading video. My wife is complaining that I'm hogging the bandwidth. Sorry. Oh, let's see here. Victim characteristics. Characteristics of serial killers. Let's talk for a minute about the victims themselves. Most victims are fairly young. Average age 33. Yes, 33 is young. On average, they're young. They're vulnerable. Almost 3/4 of them are Caucasian, and about the same percentage, about 71% Caucasian, 67% female. The murders tend to be intraracial, so they tend to stick. Victims tend to be victims of white folks killing white folks, black folks killing black folks. Jeffrey Dahmer was is an example of an exception. Jeffrey Dahmer was one. He actually killed 8 African American victims, and this was one of these exceptions, kind of a big one. Most victims don't know their killer. In fact, 90% of serial killer victims never met the serial killer before the killer killed them. Prime targets for serial killers tend to be hitchhikers, women who live alone, prostitutes, and children. About 24% of serial killers have murdered at least one child. The serial killers themselves, they tend to prefer victims who they have easy access to, who can disappear without causing much alarm or concern. When we talk about again, they tend to, like prostitutes, they tend to pick people that won't be missed. Kind of helps them get away with it. When we get to I'm going to talk about different types of serial killers. But before I do, then there's 2 different ways I can talk about types of serial killers. I'm going to do it 2 different ways. And first, I'm going to kind of look at, rather than talking directly about serial killers, I'm going to talk about their crime scenes. Because that's kind of related to types of serial killers. And there are 3 types of crime scenes when we talk about mass murder. Or, multiple murder. Serial murder. This term is confusing. There is the organized crime scene. Organized crime scene indicates some sort of premeditation and planning. It shows signs that the offender it shows signs that the offender picked the victim. Often the victim's been moved prior to or after the killing, and you can tell, law enforcement can tell that the victims are selected by some criteria. There's some pattern to how the victim's picked. This type of crime scene is done by what your textbook refers to as an organized killer. The organized killers, as you can probably tell from the organized crime scene, they usually plan their offenses. They transport their victims. They'll choose their victim in one location, take them somewhere else to do the murder. They tend to keep trophies, usually some sort of belonging, something that belonged to the victim. And they are normal in appearance. They're very socially competent. You met one of these guys on the street, you'd never know, unless he was killing you. If you look at some of the old documentaries about Ted Bundy, his friends, they all liked him. He was a nice guy. They were all extremely surprised They had no idea what a monster he was. All right, the other type is the opposite, the disorganized crime scene. Disorganized crime scene has indica that the crime was probably committed with little or no premeditation and no kind of planning. The crime scenes tend to display some sort of rage or impulse. Victims are obtained by chance. And the disorganized killers themselves, they're usually socially and sexually incompetent. Ted Bundy at the end. Ted Bundy was a very organized killer for most of his career. Towards the end, when he killed the two women, the two girls, the fraternity at Florida State University, that scene, that crime scene was very disorganized. It was very brutal. He was a very different killer at the end. Those last few murders that he committed, very different from most of his killings. Either type, both the organized and disorganized killer, they tend to return to wherever they've left the body. Often they satisfy sexual urges through masturbation by visiting the bodies. Now there is a third type of crime scene, doesn't have a killer type attached to it. It's the mixed crime scene, which is a mixture of the two. Shows some planning, shows some rage or impulse, kind of a mixture. Okay, that's one way to talk about divide typology serial killers. A second way is to define different types. Type 1 would be the visionaries. These are serial killers that are believed to be suffering from some sort of psychosis. They kill to responses and response to voices or visions. God spoke to me through the dog and told me to kill those people. There's the mission-oriented. The second type is the mission-oriented serial killer. Their mission to life is to rid society of undesirables. For example, a serial killer that targets prostitutes or drug dealers. And these people are one we get rid of them. Third type is the hedonist. The hedonist serial killer are the thrill seekers. They murder for creature comforts, profit. They kill for pleasure. This is where you put the lust murders. You'd throw them in this category. And then finally, the last type are the power control serial killers. These are ones who enjoy power and control over helpless victims. They enjoy watching them suffer and beg for mercy. They get off on it. What are some theories behind serial killers? Some reasons, and we talk about theories behind serial killers. We're talking about reasons kind of why they become the way they are. There's a few of these. Some researchers, some sociologists, psychologists think there's a sexual motive. Some suggest that in order for the offender to achieve sexual gratification, the killer has some need to torture, to mutilate, or to kill others. For these individuals, the sight of suffering arouses them to the point that some offenders, some of the very organized offenders, will create soundproof rooms and keep paraphernalia in them, things like restraints and torture racks and whips and blindfolds and weapons and gags. The killer from Silence of the Lambs, Hannibal Lecter, would be an example here with all the stuff that he kept. No, not Hannibal Lecter, but the one that Clarice was chasing in the first movie. Hannibal Lecter already in prison. He's something else. Some offenders suffer from paraphilias, such as sexual sadism, cannibalism, exhibitionism, fetishism, necrophilia. About 81%, we'll put it this way, 81% of 31 sexual predators interviewed by the FBI reported an active interest in violent pornography, and they reported that some type of sexual fantasy preceded their killings. Let's see. Another possible theory is childhood abuse. Of course, we know violent crime has often been linked with the history of child abuse. A researcher named Ressler interviewed about 36 murderers, found evidence of psychological abuse in 23 of those 36, and physical trauma in 13 of 36 of those. Another guy named Hickey studied a group of 62 serial killers, of which he found 48 had been rejected as children, either by their parent or some other adult that was important to them in their lives. Other researchers, when we talk about serial killers that that rape, so it's serial rapist / murderers, they often have a high rate of sexual abuse. Let's see, so we've got childhood relationship with parents would be a third possible explanation. Here we're looking at an instance where the study of serial killers has revealed pathological relationships with their parents, particularly mothers, who are viewed as domineering, controlling, on occasion incestuous, while fathers are often perceived as violent or absent. This would be your Norman Bates from Psycho type killer, or Norman Bates from Psycho being an example of a killer whose killing behavior was brought on by a pathological relationship with a parent. Researcher named McDonald hypothesized that some of the symptoms commonly associated with serial killers in childhood, euneresis, fire setting, and cruelty to animals, are all related to parental rejection, neglect, or brutality. And then finally, we come to mental disorder. I'm not going to spend time. We've talked about psychopathy at length last week, or I talked, or you studied, or something. And all I want to say here about mental health is that very, very few serial killers suffer from psychosis. They are, as a general, are not insane or psychotic in a legal or clinical sense. We may think they're crazy, but most of them aren't, which may be more scary. Antisocial personality, psychopathy is the diagnosis most closely associated with serial killers. And then again, no need to go into all that again because we talked about those diseases. We talked about APD and psychopathy last week. Let's see, what else do I want to talk about? Let's talk about female serial killers. That may be a couple more things. No, that's the last thing we want to talk about. Female serial killers, just a few notes about them. Female serial killers, very, very, very rare. We talk about serial killers in general being extremely rare. Female serial killers are even more rare than serial killers in general. Hickey, around 1991, found, just looking through police records and things like that, identified 34 active female serial killers between 1795 and 1988. Most of these that he identified were active after 1900, but we're talking 200 years almost, and in 200 years only I'd be able to identify 34 of these offenders. Like I said, very rare. More rare than the steak I enjoy. For females, the average age is 32. They typically have anywhere between 8 and 14 victims. When it comes to women, 97% of them are white, so even more prevalent than male serial killers for them to be Caucasian. Interestingly, 18% of female serial killers are nurses. So the next time you go to the doctor's office, think about that. They seem to be more geographically stable than male offenders. In other words, they tend to live in the same area they do their killing more often than men do. Remember, men it's about 50%. With women, it's a little higher percentage. We're not going to guess at what that is because, again, 34 of these women in 200 years. About half of them kill for money. Insurance, life insurance, stocks, bonds. Marry them, kill them, get the life insurance. Marry someone else, kill them, get the life insurance. You get the idea. 47% for enjoyment or revenge. Sometimes those are combined. Female serial killers are more likely to kill someone known to them than male serial killers. Remember, for males, 90% of the victims never met the serial killer before they killed him. With women, only about a third of female serial killers victimize strangers. And so you're looking at 66% or so of victims of female serial killers actually knew their killer before they were killed. Victims are mostly husbands, former husbands, suitors. For you young folks, a suitor, that's an old-timey phrase for somebody you're dating, sort of. They ain't called black widows for nothing, folks. Give you an example. One lady named Belle Gunness murdered somewhere between 14 and 49 husbands or suitors during her career. Apparently she was married several times. You'd think someone would catch on after a while. Don't marry her. Bad things happen to her husbands. She must have been a real looker. Anyway, many female serial killers are quiet killers. They tend to work in some sort of caring capacity, in which the victim is dependent upon them. It gives them access to them. This is women who work in some sort of child care situation, nurses, particularly women who maybe work in nursing homes. And then, let's see, a couple more things. Female serial killers tend to be less violent than males. They prefer using poison or lethal injection or suffocation as opposed to more violent means of murder. And then finally, women, unlike male serial killers, are not always solo. Many female serial killers work with male partners, which, again, fairly unusual. As when we talk about male serial killers, they tend to work alone. Okay, that is all I want to pass on to you this week. There's more subjects and there are more things in the textbook, like workplace violence, that make sure that you read. Now that you've got an idea of what the tests are going to be like, the final exam is very similar to the midterm. So that you get a good idea of what to expect. And this will probably be the pattern for these classes from now on. This is how I teach upper level courses on campus. 2 tests, paper, and then that's it. So, at any rate, keep working on your term paper. I'll have grades for the midterm out as soon as I can. I will see you next week.